Hey, Husker fans, welcome to another episode of the Husker Big Red podcast with Chris Peterson and Danny Gillette. As always, go Big Red. Good morning, Husker fans, and welcome back to the Husker Big Red YouTube channel. I'm Chris Peterson, and joining me, as always, is Danny Gillette. We're back for another episode of the podcast here, and we have a bunch of news to cover. It was a busy weekend for the Huskers. We have a new commitment in the 2025 class, a new expert projection. I'll say not a new crystal ball, but a new expert projection to talk about today, and a bunch of other recruiting news. So we'll get into that in just a second. Before we do, please make sure that you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Check out HuskerBigRed.com, and also we appreciate all of your comments. So, anyways, Danny, how you doing this morning, man? Celtics couldn't quite seal the deal, but maybe they just wanted to do it at home.
That's what I'm thinking. I mean, they completely kind of melted in by the start of the second half, so I'm thinking they want to do it at home in front of their fans. If they lose tonight, then I'll be really worried, but I'm not worried about Friday's loss. In the meantime, my fingers are very sore from all this typing that I've been doing over the weekend, and I'm sure yours are as well, but I'd rather be busy this time of year than just sitting here bored, because we've done that before too, just sitting here bored, and it's not a good time.
No, and it's there's a lot of things happening with Nebraska football, as you alluded to there. I guess we'll start with the newest commitment, the newest Husker, Malcolm Simpson, four-star defensive lineman in the 24/7 Sports Composite rankings, a four-star in the On3 industry rankings. I really like what this kid, can bring. 6'3", 255 pounds out of Galveston, Texas. It was interesting that, the in-state schools didn't seem to recruit him quite as much. I think he was kind of alluding to that in some of his social media stuff, that, when he was talking about getting the love from Nebraska and all that. But, another great victory, I think, for Terrence Knighton, who's just done an incredible job on the trail. But 293 overall is where, he's ranked, the number 23 defensive lineman. And I'll give you my take. Malcolm Simpson, when I watch his film, he reminds me a lot of Jamari Butler, a guy who can rush the quarterback, who can be a tradition, like a 4-3 defensive end, who can play some of that 5 technique as he, builds his body up a little bit. Not quite as tall as Jamari Butler, but that's where I could see, his role as kind of that guy who's a pass rusher, maybe bumps inside on, run down situations more, when they're using more of the base defense. But that's where I kind of see him, a pass rushing, more of a traditional D-end, a James Williams type. They love to bring those guys in on those pass rushing downs. So Nebraska doesn't always have like that edge rusher stand-up type. They do sometimes have their guys with the hand in the ground, and I think Malcolm Simpson fits this defensive line really well.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned James Williams, because that's another guy that I thought of as well when I thought of, Simpson, and just the way he moves is pretty impressive. He moves very quick. Like you said, he's a good pass rusher. His athleticism also helps in terms of, getting into the backfield quickly and stopping the run. He's very good at his pursuit angles when he can get there, and he's a very solid tackler. He doesn't really necessarily rely on a lot of, rip and swim moves to get to the passer and beat his offensive lineman. It's more of just like a straight, kind of finesse type of movement. He's very fluid in his movements. He's very good at going as soon as the ball is snapped. He wastes no time, and I honestly don't know how no Texas schools really recruited him, or if they did, their interest wasn't a ton, because I really think, it sounds crazy for a 4-star recruit, but I kind of think he flew under the radar here. And this isn't the first time we've seen Nebraska kind of, recruit a kid who flew under the radar in the state of Texas and, get a chance to land him. So I really, really like what Simpson brings to the table here. I think he's extremely athletic. I think he's going to be a very good football player. And, I think it's just another case of, Nebraska getting the guy they want. And I know you mentioned something about Terrence Knighton just a little bit ago, and he's been extremely impressive on the recruiting trail over the past, year and a half or so. And when you look at, players departing following next season, you have Ty Robinson and obviously Nash. And, you were thinking, and me and you were a little bit worried, who are Nebraska going to get in the defensive line for the 2025 class? We need another defensive lineman. And now we have 2 in the 2025 class, and Tyson Terry and Malcolm Simpson. That's a pretty good combo.
Yeah, I definitely like where they stand, and Terrence Knighton's done a great job. I would say that outside of Tony White, I would probably say he's been Matt Rule's best hire, and that's, there's been some good ones, Dvoracek and Garrett McGuire, and keeping Donovan Raiola has been a very good move. But Terrence Knight and this guy, it's going to be tough to keep him here because I mean NFL teams are going to become calling at some point. Like this guy's doing a great job, and not only with the recruiting but the development. I mean, we could see the steps that those guys took last year. I mean, he got Lenhart ready to play last year. James Williams, Jamari Butler took a big leap. So he's doing a really great job in the recruiting side and the development. And that's a big step, I think, going forward because, outside of, your coordinators and your head coach, I would say your D line and your O line coach are probably your two most important coaches because you can't win games consistently in college football unless you're doing well on the offensive and defensive lines. And for the first time in a long time, I feel very good about where Nebraska sits with their O-line and D-line coaches. And this weekend was just another reminder of that. And it's like anytime that Terrence Knight tweets out the GIF, the good news is coming, and fairly most of the time, pretty soon. Like that guy wraps up business quickly, so I like it. So yeah, nice pickup there for the Huskers. Another 4-star recruit. To get into that blue chip ratio, I think they've got 3 now with Latif.
They do. They have TJ, and they have Simpson, and they have one more,
Jamarian Parker.
That's right, yeah. And Simpson is actually the second highest rated commitment in the Nebraska class so far. I think that might change soon, but it just speaks to how talented he is.
So another 4-star that potentially could be in the mix for the Huskers. A lot of interesting things happening with Dawson Merritt over the weekend. He visited Alabama not this past weekend, but the weekend before that. And it's been a Nebraska-Alabama battle he said that basically after the spring game when he visited Nebraska with his dad, who's an assistant coach for the Kansas City Chiefs. But this has been really interesting because, some of the Alabama reporters for On3 put in expert projections. Steve Wiltfong did, which, I say he's the lead expert in all of college football recruiting. So usually when he puts in a prediction, most of the time it goes that way. But this one may not. And there's no crystal balls yet. I know that Chad Simmons and actually Steve Wiltfong also reported that Nebraska is gaining momentum with both of these guys. Matt Rule had a call with Dawson Merritt, according to Chad Simmons, and that really I think put Nebraska on a better path. He tweeted out the shush emoji, but it was interesting because he did 3 of them, and to me that's all go big GBR, go big red. I don't know if that's any correlation, but we'll see what happens.
There's been talk. Something there. I never even thought of that, but I think you're onto something.
So there's been talk of maybe another visit. Sean Callahan reported that this morning, not reported, but just mentioned that another visit could be possible. So I don't know. As last week, I felt very much that Alabama was in the lead for this thing. Now I at least feel that it's a 50-50 recruitment again, and Nebraska might even have the lead. And who knows, if I was to say like the next, if I was to guess who would be the next commitment for Nebraska, it might be Dawson Merritt. That very well could happen this week, anytime really.
That's the beauty of recruiting, right? One week you think you're out, and now next week you're back in again. And it's interesting because he commented GBR on Michael Terry's Instagram post on Saturday, I believe it was. And so I think there's definitely smoke here. Tim Verges of Rivals said that if he were to put in a future cast for Merritt, he would, put in one for Nebraska. And Verges reported that on Sunday. So I feel really good about, where Merritt is trending in relationship to a Nebraska commitment. And this would just be another big get. And also, if we could land Terry, I think that would just, I don't even have words to describe it. I'd be so fired up.
Yeah, Terry, I mean, I would say Terry or Dawson Merritt would both be, huge additions. But yeah, Michael Terry would be, to get another 5-star for the second year in a row. And a guy that could, yeah, and then a guy that, and Terry who could play, defensive back, he could play wide receiver, he could play running back. I mean, there's so many positions where he could truly help. I mean, he could truly be like a Debo Samuel type for it. I mean, there really is, you talk about like the ceiling, like there is probably no ceiling with Michael Terry. Like that kid is an absolute freak. How fast he is for how big he is. I mean, my goodness, if you can imagine him and Jalen Lloyd and Malachi Coleman and, Ja'Cory Barney all on the field at the same time, like that's pretty scary for opposing defenses. So we'll see if they can make that happen. But it's been impressive how they, have made a late push for Dawson Merritt. And, Matt Rule is just a relentless recruiter, and he's just very difficult to beat out for guys. We saw that with Malachi Coleman, a couple of years ago where Colorado, He went on a visit there. They got the crystal ball, and then Steve Wiltfong put it in, and then 2 days later he met with Matt Rule, and it was flipped back, and the announcement came, and so. This guy knows how to recruit. He knows how to coach. He knows how to develop. He knows how to schmooze with the people. So I don't know. Matt Rule as a head coach can pretty much do it all. And if he can land Dawson Merritt, that's going to be quite the feather in his cap, and another one for this Nebraska staff.
And so can his coaching staff, right? Terrence Knighton has done a good job. Garrett McGuire has done a good job in recruiting. Tony White has done a good job. I mean, so it's not just Matt Rule, and I'm not saying that you said that. I'm just kind of making a broader point here. It's his entire staff. His entire staff has that same work ethic and that kind of go-getter mentality, and it's just so great to see. And I never in a million years, like even when we started the show 2 years ago, I never thought we'd be talking about 5-star commitments, possibly coming to Nebraska or having a 5-star quarterback at Nebraska. I mean, that just seemed so far out of the equation at the time. And now what a difference 2 years can make.
Yeah, it is. It's been an impressive run for the Huskers, and they could have a really solid run of recruiting wins here if they can get Merritt and Terry, and those are both, I would say, just up in the air right now with Terry. I'm not even sure who the biggest threat would be. I mean, there's Texas A&M, and Oregon, and he said, it's like this. He says the same thing after every visit. The visit went great. It's like, okay, well, so I really don't know who the biggest threat is for Michael Terry. Maybe that's a sign right there that it's still Nebraska, but his recruitment's been kind of hard to read. And I don't know. He said that NIL was going to be really important, and if you're talking NIL, I think Oregon might be the favorite, but there's other factors as well. So I don't know. That'll be an interesting recruitment to watch here. Now that I think he's wrapped up all his official visits. I'm not sure though. I'd have to double check.
Just one of these days, I'd love a recruit to say, "This visit was terrible. I hated it. I'm never coming back." This is awful.
The food was terrible. the cheerleaders were ugly.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but I feel like if Terry really wanted to go to Oregon or Texas A&M, or if NIL was really that important, I feel like a decision would have been made by now. So I feel like a decision not being made certainly works in Nebraska's favor, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And then I wanted to touch on, Christian Jones, who I think was, probably the biggest target on campus this weekend from a recruiting perspective. This was his 11th visit. He's the top-ranked player in the state. I think he's like 153 overall. So, I mean, he's in the top 160 overall. So he's a big-time player at linebacker. And, there was kind of some posts about like, Nebraska could be adding 2 linebackers with Dawson Merritt and Christian Jones. A lot of positive buzz with Christian Jones. Steve Wiltfong wrote that he had put in a projection for him when he was at 24/7 Sports, and then he was very close to doing the same thing for on3.com and the recruiting prediction machine. So, I mean, I was like on the point where by this weekend, I was like, man, we could see a commitment from Christian Jones like upcoming this week, like
I said
Carter
the same
Nelson.
Thing. I said we would see a commitment from him on Sunday. That didn't happen,
but now there's been an interesting report from Sean Callahan of Husker Online that this recruiting timeline could extend into the fall. He's got a visit on the schedule for Oklahoma this weekend. And then there was talk about him taking a visit maybe to Wisconsin in the fall. And that, I think, kind of throws me for a loop. I didn't, it's just interesting to extend the recruitment out that far when it seemed like Nebraska, there was some buzz that Nebraska might be, on the path to closing this thing out. And so to come out of this visit talking about another visit to Wisconsin in the fall just doesn't give me the vibe that I thought that it would. I thought we'd have a different vibe. Like I thought we'd be talking more of a crystal ball, and we could still be. Things are very fluid in recruiting, but I felt like we would be closer to a commitment than maybe we are with that report of that visit happening potentially.
I wouldn't be too worried yet. I mean, Jones maybe just wants to take his time and make sure he makes the right decision, because I think a lot of times, people look at it as just a football decision, but it's also a college decision and an academic decision. And maybe he just wants to take a look at the program and see, how they do in the fall or how they start off in the fall and things like that. So I would still put Nebraska in the lead. I wouldn't be too worried. The Wisconsin visit is interesting, but maybe he just wants to explore all options. I'm not sounding the alarm on him by any means, and I'm not saying that you are either. I just wouldn't necessarily, panic yet. I still think Nebraska has a really good shot at landing him. But like you alluded to, I do find that other visit very interesting.
But Christian Jones posted like a picture with Daniel Kalen, or like a video. He had another picture with his dad and the
His
strength
dad is
coach.
absolutely jacked. I'm sorry, his dad is
Yeah.
absolutely I wonder if his dad has any eligibility left because man, like his dad is an absolute beast in the best way. I love it.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was a pretty funny picture, and his dad was rocking the Nebraska shirt too. So I don't know. I feel like Nebraska's going to win this one,
Yeah,
but maybe it's just going to take
yeah.
a little more time than some of us want. But recruits don't always make their decisions on the timeline that we want to. Crazy as that may sound, but they do.
It's all
It
about
is,
us.
yeah, it is a pretty important decision in their life too. So,
Yeah.
But there, beyond that, there's still a lot of positive buzz with Christian Jones, Dawson Merritt, Michael Terry, and then another guy that I'm really high on. We talked about a new commitment. There's also a new crystal ball, or a new expert projection, I should say. We just kind of call it crystal ball because I think everybody understands what that means. But it's a on-3 expert prediction from Sean Callahan of Husker Online, but with projecting Brian Tapu from Utah. A 6'8", 6'7", 300-pound offensive tackle to the Huskers. He did an interview with Brian Munson of Husker Online and basically said, Nebraska's my top team right now, and I have a visit to Oregon State, and I'll decide after that. Those were Tapu's words. So Nebraska is the leader in his words going into this Oregon State visit. I have a hard time thinking that Oregon State's going to upset that, but I've been proven wrong plenty of times before. It could happen. However, when I was looking at kind of objectives that I wanted Nebraska to achieve this weekend. I wrote some of those up, I think, on Friday, and one was try to close with Christian Jones. But another one was to, make some progress with these offensive tackle targets. And I definitely think that they did that with Hammerbeck from South Dakota, but also Tapu. And, this is a guy that hasn't played football for that long. He's ranked 676 in the 24/7 sports composite rankings, but just a guy that I feel like has a lot of raw ability. And if you could mold him for a year or two, you might really get, somebody who's playing at a level of like a top 100 recruit, because I think he's got that kind of potential in the future.
I love West Coast linemen. I mean, there's just something about them. They're built differently. They're built sturdy, and it's very encouraging from a Nebraska perspective that he only really has offers from West Coast teams, because Nebraska's been able to do a good job, in recent recruiting cycles of landing those West Coast linemen. And a lot of times you'll see their recruiting cycles extend a little bit later, like to January of the following year, or even a little bit in February. So I really like where Nebraska stands. Like you kind of alluded to, he's a little bit of a more raw prospect, but at the same time, if you want to get developed, on the offensive line, you've come to the right place. And so I think he could have a chance to be a really, really solid player. I saw, the same report that you probably saw where he spoke very highly of Nebraska. So I feel really good about Nebraska landing him. And, 6'8", like you can't teach size. So I absolutely love where Nebraska stands for him here too. And I know I say I love where they stand for everybody, but this weekend really made me feel confident about where they stand for some of their top targets. And Tapu is certainly one of those guys.
Yeah, and just looking, I thought since they feel like they're more on the outside looking in with David Sanders, even though I saw he was at Tennessee and they had like a picture of his like plate and they spelled his name wrong, Davis Sanders. It's like, come on, guys. You had one. You like how pissed off would you be as like Josh Heupel or whatever if you see that and you're like the recruiting staff people, you're like, come on, man, you had one job to get the guy's name right on the plate and you couldn't even.
Honestly though, if they were feeding me steak and green beans like I saw on that plate, I wouldn't care if they called me Fred. I'd be very happy with the steak. So
that's true. If it's cooked, it looked pretty solid. But I did think it was important for Nebraska to get an offensive tackle for this. I mean, more than one, obviously, but I really feel like Tapu's a guy that can outplay his ranking in the future. I think that they did make progress with Sean Hammerbeck too. So I thought that was a big positive. I didn't hear much buzz about Isaiah Mosey. I'm not sure where they stand with him or kind of what's it was interesting that he took that visit. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure if they have much buzz coming up there. I hopefully there'll be maybe some reporting today, but yeah, I feel like that they're going to have to get him back on campus again if they're going to actually flip him from Oregon. So we'll see where that one goes. I have a lot more faith that they could get. I'll just say this: I have more faith that they can just land Michael Terry outright than flipping Isaiah Mosey from Oregon.
Maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting because he was talked about as one of the bigger additions, coming into the weekend, and in terms of adding him to the visit list. And you're right, I didn't hear a peep about Isaiah Mosey, so I'm wondering how that recruitment is going. I think I'm not really sure where Nebraska stands right now, but at the same time, they certainly are not lacking options at wide receiver, and that they want to, get quality players. So I wouldn't be too worried yet. Maybe some more reports will come out on Monday, but I think, if you land Michael Terry, you don't necessarily need Isaiah Mosey. You want Isaiah Mosey, but I wouldn't necessarily be too worried yet if I was a Nebraska fan. It's more just, trying to figure out where Mosey stands on the board. Because if you look at the wide receiver room, it's kind of crowded right now. I mean, you also have, Raheem Hutchins as a possible target. And then I saw we made the top 3 for one other wide receiver, which you posted. And I can't remember the name off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't quite remember either. But and then you have Jackson Carpenter and Bryson Hayes already committed in the 20.
Yeah.
So we already have 2 in the fold already. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it all kind of plays out. But I really like where this class is trending. 3 out of your 11 are blue chip recruits. But I mean, you look at all these guys ranked. Only Tanner Turch is ranked outside the top 1,000 right now. So I feel like they're doing a nice job with a lot of these recruitments, and they've got a lot of blue chips to go. Chase Lofton. I'm not going to, his visit to, still the same thing, as with Michael Terry. He said a lot of good things about Texas A&M. I guess the thing that makes me worried about Texas A&M more than, Florida State is because Chase Lofton did go a little bit more in depth and like, oh, this visit was great. He talked about Colin Klein, who's the offensive coordinator now at A&M, when he coached at Kansas State, how he developed his brother. That's where Chase Lofton's brother played, was at Kansas State.
Yeah.
And Chase also mentioned how, the Aggies kind of laid out a plan for him to, make an early impact, to play early at Texas A&M. So, I think Nebraska can do the same thing, but they also have, Carter Nelson there too. So like, I'm not sure if they're going to be able to make the same pitch in terms of, playing time and whatnot as Texas A&M will be able to. And then the Colin Klein connection to, Chase Lofton's brother. To me, that's, that could be something where he's like talking to his brother and he's like, yeah, man, this is a great coach to play for. Like, he's going to help you succeed and, yada, yada, yada. And all those things make me a little more worried about Texas A&M than I am about any other team, I think, right now in terms of the Chase Lofton recruitment.
Admittedly, it's hard to say no to have the opportunity to, be coached by Colin Klein. He was a fantastic college quarterback, if I remember correctly. And, I think Nebraska is in decent shape at the tight end position. I think looking back on everything now, landing Bear Tenney for the 2025 class was huge. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens at the tight end position. The room, you have Ann Flint, you have Ishmael Smith-Flores, I believe, still. And you also have Eric Ingwerson. Keelan Smith can also play tight end. So you have options there. And I'm wondering if, he also senses a crowded room for Nebraska in that regard.
Yeah, it could definitely be possible. So, yeah, we'll have to see that this visit this weekend is going to be important with Chase Lofton. It's just been interesting because, like with Christian Jones, there hasn't been any expert predictions. Well, there have been with Chase Lofton, or excuse me, there have been with Christian Jones, not with Chase Lofton. Sorry. So it'll be interesting to see when the first one of those kind of, drops in with Chase Lofton. If that'll be, for Nebraska, that'll be what I'll be watching for kind of after this weekend. Can they get some buzz and, turn that buzz, into a commitment? Because Chase Lofton, as opposed to Christian Jones wanting to extend his recruitment. I mean, he said he wants to decide soon. And he said that after the Florida State visit, which was, 2 weeks ago, or I guess, 10 days ago, not this past weekend, but the weekend before. Mm-hmm. And so I don't see him dragging this out super long. And if it does drag out past this Nebraska visit, then that tells me that he's thinking very seriously of leaving the state of Nebraska, which, he might take another visit or something to Texas A&M like July or something. You know what I mean? They have those, like Nebraska had the cookout. There's that one, because after this weekend, it's going to be a dead period. And then you see a bunch of commitments. And then there's one weekend at the end of July where, they reopen recruiting and you can have like those official visits, and that's when everybody has their big like barbecue or whatever the hell you want to call it. Every school calls it something different, but it's the same thing. So like if Chase Lofton hasn't decided by then and then takes a trip to like Texas A&M, then yeah, that's probably going to tell you where he's going to go with it. So I would expect and hope that he would commit within the next few weeks after this Nebraska visit this coming weekend.
And it could be as simple as, especially in the case of Jones, a kid who wants to leave the state and explore something new other than, the state of Nebraska. I mean, I think that gets lost in the, translation in terms of things too. I mean, you got to remember, and I'm not saying you, but just in general, there's a lot that goes into the college decision, probably more so than just football in some aspects. So it'll be interesting to see how the dominoes fall. I'm kind of interested to see, what Nebraska does at the tight end position, especially after the other tight end canceled his visit and then committed to Stanford. So I'm kind of, waiting to see where this board falls.
Yeah, and then, there's with, you got running back 2 with Mecky Nelson is another guy that could be taking a visit. So I guess an official visit. I guess his previous visit was an unofficial visit. So I guess he could be coming in for an official visit. And if that happens, then I think it would be a situation where Nebraska would take 3 running back commitments. I do think that's possible. And part of the reason why is just, EJ Barthel's had a really long running relationship recruiting this kid back from UConn. So I think it's kind of, they feel really good about him. Plus, they haven't taken very many running backs in the past few classes. So I don't think it's crazy. Ohio State's going to take 3 running backs, I think, in this class. So it's not that insane to take 3, especially when you've only taken 1 in 2022. I mean, in 2023 and 2024. And then if you have 3 in the class, it guards you a little bit more. I'm not saying that something's going to happen with Jamarian Parker in any stretch of the imagination, but if something did, where he gets flipped at the end of the year, then you're not sitting there being like, man, we only have 1 running back in this class. So definitely makes sense. So we'll see how that goes. I guess there hasn't been any more like buzz about, the quarterback, the Gramstead kid, Jalen Gramstead, the NAIA quarterback. And overall, I mean, I do think that would be a positive addition to the room. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be. I know a lot of people kind of, were not arguing with us, but disagreeing with some of the comments. I think especially the ones that I made about him not playing or whatever. But I mean, it's not that I don't want another quality quarterback in the room. I'm just more worried about, I guess, thinking about over the weekend, I want the reps to go to guys that are actually going to play at Nebraska. And is this kid actually ever going to play at Nebraska? I'm not sure. And so I don't know if I really want his reps going to, the reps that could be going to like Daniel Kalen as the backup quarterback this year going to him. So I don't know. I mean, I can see it from both perspectives, but I haven't heard any news yet. I would think something would happen fairly soon. I mean, if he's going to join the team, this has to happen quickly. I mean, we're in July. I mean, we're almost to July now. So like, summer workouts have started. So I would think if something's going to happen, we would hear about it relatively soon with Jalen Gramstead.
Yeah, and I want another quarterback just to add another body to the room. I'm not necessarily a fan of going with a 2 quarterback room. I understand that's what a lot of teams are doing now, and I get that. But there's also the possibility. What if? And I'm not saying this is going to happen. I don't think it's going to be. But what if Dylan Raiola struggles a little bit? What if he needs to, just take a step back at some point during the season? What if Daniel Kalen's not ready when Dylan needs to take a step back, or Heinrich, can't go or something like that, or if he's not the answer either. That's where I think adding another quarterback to the room would be helpful. I mean, I think by the end of things, say Gramstead were to join the team, I think things will show in camp as to who the starting quarterback is going to be, who's going to get the most reps. So I like the idea. I definitely understand where you're coming from, because at the same time, you don't want to give Gramstead meaningful reps as you try to develop Kalen and Raiola, but I do think it's good to have another one on the roster, because you never know. And, we as fans want to say, oh, Dylan Raiola is going to go, 12-0 and throw for 8,000 yards and 95 touchdowns in his first season. But we never know how the development process is going to be, no matter how talented a kid is, or, what bumps he might encounter. So I think it's smart to add another quarterback in the room. I don't think by the end of things that taking away reps is going to be a major issue, but I definitely understand your point, because we've seen it happen before, right? We've seen other quarterbacks take away meaningful reps from the starter, and it hasn't been a pretty sight.
Yeah, and I don't know. Yeah, it's just kind of an interesting situation where they have, these three quarterbacks competing, and I feel like they have a really good room and a really good vibe in that room. And I'm not saying that Gramstead is going to mess that up, but it's just like somebody's going to have to take fewer reps. You know what I mean? And it's probably not going to be Dylan Raiola, so it's either going to be Harburg or Kalen. And so I don't want them to mess up that dynamic. But at the end of the day,
I definitely understand. Yeah, no, I understand.
I think the positives probably outweigh the negatives. I guess I've kind of come around to that part of it where, if you're sitting there and Dylan Raiola gets a high ankle sprain and has to miss a week or two, you might need another option there to get you through to a bowl game or something. So I think the positives probably do outweigh the negatives if they can get that done and, get him some sort of NIL walk-on type of deal. That's what we always talked about. If they could find somebody that would be willing to take that, and I think he would be willing to. I don't think they'd have to use a scholarship. So, that would be a good thing. I had another thing I was going to talk about. I mentioned, well, what was interesting, just back to the Dylan Raiola thing, I saw that you had posted a thing about quarterbacks that would play well in their first year as a starter or something. And I think he was like 10th on the list. And I know that Alex Orji for Michigan was above him, and it was just like, come on, man. Like, are you guys not thinking when you write these posts? Like, I have nothing. I think Alex Orji is going to be fine. Like, I'm reasonably excited for him to be the Michigan starter. But if there's anybody in their right mind that doesn't think that Michigan would trade Alex Orji for Dylan Raiola in like 2 seconds, like, they are just absolutely out of their mind. Like,
because they don't cover the team like we do, Chris. They it's just a base list of big names that they calculate, and they want to sound smart. And
Alex Orji competed 51% of his passes in high school. Like, I'm not saying he's going to struggle, but he's not going to be an NFL draft pick at quarter. Like, he's going to be, like, the best case scenario for him is probably like the Ohio State quarterbacks, back in the day, like when Urban first got there, that were just like mostly running, like Braxton Miller, like they mostly ran the ball and then they could throw a little bit. Like, I think he could be that, but to rank him above.
I love watching Braxton Miller.
And I mean, if Alex Orji could be that would be incredible. Like, but I just think he's more that type of quarterback. Like, I just don't think he's ever going to be an NFL quarterback. That's just my opinion. I could be totally wrong, but just the idea that some of these rankings are so stupid. I mean, that's so dumb. Like, come on, man. Dylan Raiola, like, the talent level, they're just not even in the same converse. That would be like ranking Alex Orji above like Arch Manning. You know what I'm saying? Like, I do think actually Dylan Raiola is pretty close to Arch Manning. I really do.
And I feel like Jackson Arnold, he's 4th on this list. I just have it up now. I feel like he should be like 3rd at the very least. I don't know. Some of these rankings,
he's going to be good.
Let's see. So it goes Nico Imalavea at number 1, Avery Johnson, which we didn't miss out on him, at 2, Garrett Nussmeier of LSU at 3, Jackson Arnold 4, Oklahoma obviously, Miller Moss at 5, Aiden Chili's Michigan State at 6, Brock Vandegrift at 7, Ethan Garbers for UCLA at 8, Alex Orji at 9, and Dylan Raiola at 10. And so I don't have a problem with the bottom of the list necessarily, but I mean,
Ethan, get out of here with that Ethan Garbers above Dylan Raiola. Come on, man. Like, Deshaun Foster would be he would be down on his knees thanking the heavens if he had Dylan Raiola.
I'm just saying, like,
I know what you're saying.
We can definitely scrutinize the bottom of the list, but the bottom of the quarterback list is where they need to be. Dylan Raiola is not 10, but I could see him at least at 8 for right now. Garbers is not that good. Orji, I mean, you've seen him a lot more than I have, but I don't know.
I haven't seen him throwing. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting because I think Michigan's, like, people, there's a misconception that Michigan was like really good in the run game last year, but Nebraska actually averaged more yards per game and more yards per attempt than Michigan did last year. And a big reason for that is because they refused over the last 2 years to put JJ McCarthy into the running game as like a true option. They would seldom, when they needed to, they would throw him in there, but he was never like a true read option threat. And now that's going to completely change with Alex Orji. So I'm just wondering how that's going to affect things, because it's like when you have a quarterback that's really truly a threat to run the football, that just totally changes how you have to defend the zone read. And so I think that Michigan's like Donovan Edwards and these guys are going to have, even though I think there's going to be more guys in the box, I think it's going to be lighter because they're going to have to account for Alex Orji. Because if not, like that dude will just run the ball like 15 times a game. I mean, so I think that's going to be interesting to see how it works out. But I have never. I mean, he threw the ball a little in the spring game, and that's the thing that's tough too. Those like a spring game's not a great place to evaluate a quarterback like that because he's a runner, and you're not going to do live hits. But the main point though is I do think that Dylan Raiola is going to be better than him, and I think he'll be better than the UCLA kid, and I think he's going to be one of the better starters in the Big Ten like this year. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for Dylan Raiola to be like third team All Big Ten this year. Like I really don't. I know that's kind of like a bold prediction, but
we're
the Big Ten's not loaded
on this show. We love bold predictions on this show. So,
but I mean, so like there's Drew Aller, who I think is better than people give him credit for.
I don't like him at all. I'll just say that right now. I don't like him at all. But see, like I don't like Christian Hackenberg used to drive me up a wall whenever I watched him. Like I don't know, some of the Penn State quarterbacks just make me nuts.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but he still had like 20 some touchdowns to 2 picks or whatever.
Clifford when he was playing. I liked him, but
yeah, and then Oregon's got Dylan Gabriel. Ohio State has Will Howard. Like I would say those are the top 3 quarterbacks in the Big Ten, and unless I'm missing somebody, and I don't think that that's like that great. I mean, I know Dylan Gabriel's been in the Heisman conversation for like a million years, but I still think that I think by the end of the season, I think Dylan Raiola can definitely be like a top 5 Big Ten quarterback, and I think there's a good chance he can set himself up to be like the best quarterback in the Big Ten going into the 2025 season.
I'm definitely interested to see what Gabriel does with Oregon, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I do think he'll fit well in the offense. But it's also interesting, just this list features 2 former Georgia quarterbacks. So
I know
it's kind of interesting because Vandegrift obviously was committed when Raiola was also committed. So it's just interesting, and it just goes to show that kids know when you're selling them BS. And Vandegrift and Raiola got out pretty quickly because they knew they weren't going to start over Carson Beck. And looking back on it now, I don't think Georgia thought that maybe Carson Beck would develop as well as he has. But no, it's really interesting to see 2 former Georgia quarterbacks are in the top 10 list, and they wouldn't have probably even started at Georgia. And Dylan Raiola is now here, and he's probably going to be the day 1 starter. So it just goes to show how much talent Georgia can get quickly and where we need to be if we ever want to get to that level.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I don't know if we'll ever get to that level, but maybe it would be. Yeah, I posted a thing where it was like, when of all the teams that have been ranked number 1, or since number of weeks, and it was like, when's Nebraska going to be number 1 again? I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they'll ever get number 1 again, but I thought that about Michigan too, though. About 5-6 years ago, I would have said that about Michigan too, that I don't know if they'll ever get to be number 1, and they did. So Nebraska probably can get there too. I think if it's going to happen, I think maybe sometime in the next few years with Mr. Raiola at quarterback might be a good chance, but I don't want to get too optimistic.
Which one? Ooh, there we go.
Yeah, there we go. Maybe Dayton Raiola in the future, but I think Dylan Raiola is going to be, or Raiola. I keep probably saying it wrong, but I do think that he's, like I said, man, I think he's going to be Nebraska's JJ McCarthy. So we'll see how that works out.
Don't ever compare those 2 quarterbacks ever again. You know my feelings on JJ McCarthy.
I don't know. JJ McCarthy's like, I don't even want to get into it. So, anyways, let's just wrap up the show there.
And on the Dayton Raiola thing, really quickly, he did impress at the Friday Night Lights camp, so that's good. And also, just really quickly before I forget, congratulations to Casey Tominaga for signing with the Curry brand. I believe it's the first international individual to sign with the brand itself, and I think that's really cool. I'm glad that he's getting his flowers, more than just at a Nebraska level. So I just wanted to throw that in. Congrats to him.
Yeah, and he's done a few workouts, so he's still chance where he can get drafted. If not, then he'll probably be like the biggest star in the Japanese league or whatever. So lots of exciting things on the front in the future of the Keisei Tominaga, and then another. We should mention another former Husker that got his flowers a little bit on Sunday. Adrian Martinez, our boy, got won the regular season MVP, was the championship game MVP, led the Birmingham Stallions to the UFL championship on Sunday. So congrats to him, and I really hope that this leads to an NFL opportunity. And it would really warm my heart if he could find a way to get onto a 53-man roster. So I know it didn't work out at Nebraska.
As long as Mario Verduzco and Scott Frost are far away from Adrian Martinez, that could probably happen.
As long as he has some offensive linemen that can actually block for him, might help.
And
That might help play quarterback. I'm not sure. People
and
have said having an offensive line can help.
yeah, I mean that's just what I've heard, and I think I think you would know that better than anybody. And
Experts have said so, have said as such.
and just really quickly, I know we got to go, but I wanted to touch on this too. Earlier last week, Nebraska landed a transfer baseball outfielder, Cale Frost, hopefully a better Frost. He was the Summit League player and newcomer of the year. He hit 343 with 21 home runs and 59 runs batted in as a junior. Again, he comes from South Dakota State, so that could be helpful for the program too.
Yeah, that was a nice, a good pickup there for Will Bolt, bringing in another bat. So, all right, you guys, we'll wrap it up there. We'll be back for another episode sometime this week. Not sure exactly when, we'll figure that out. But at any rate, please make sure that you guys hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, get into the comment section, and check out HuskerBigRed.com too. We're going to have a lot of updates because I feel like it's going to be a busy week of recruiting news. So, at any rate, thanks again for spending your morning with us or afternoon or whatever. Have a great week. And as always, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.